and welcome. You're watching The Big Picture. I'm Ishan Russell, and our focus tonight is, of course, on American President Barack Obama, who's just about wrapping up his India visit. What are the big takeaways? How is the India-America partnership, the strategic vision that was outlined? We'll be talking about all that and more over the next half hour, summing up what can be expected moving on from here between India and the United States of America. And to help us understand that, we have with us KP Nair. He's the consulting editor at The Telegraph. Professor Gulshan Sachdeva is here. He's with the School of International Studies at JNU. Pramit Pal Chaudhary, Foreign Affairs Editor of the Hindustan Times, joins us. And we're also joined by Ambassador B.S. Prakash. KP, I'll start with you because for the next half hour, we'll try to sum up what's really happened, get the big takeaways out, and we'll start with the latest event, the business summit that happened. We saw both the leaders address that summit, and in terms of takeaways from that for you, what would be the big takeaway?
From the summit?
From the from the business summit.
What struck me, I was at the business summit earlier in the evening, and what struck me most about the summit was that President Obama has taken ownership of this relationship there,
right,
like he never did at any point earlier during the visit. He said in so many words in his speech that I came here 4 years ago. I started all this, you know. I mean, here if you read our newspapers and often listen to our pundits, we are concentrating so much on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's diplomatic coup. He did this and all that. So it was a bit startling and very revealing to hear President Obama say that I was the one who started this, you know,
right,
and now we are carrying on from there. And he went on to announce a few things at the summit, you know, three things actually he announced. We'll go into that later. But the my point is that the visit is concluding now, and the greatest result, I think, is that the relationship has been kick-started after it hit a plateau for the last few years. It has been kick-started, and I get the feeling that President Obama is now more enthused with the relationship than he was when he arrived.
All right.
And I think that's a good augury for what lies ahead.
All right, so and a lot of the credit, I mean, just going from what the media has been saying, is due to the personal chemistry. Do you think that personal chemistry can make that five-fold increase in trade happen?
Well, I mean, I think that to some extent this can help because, you know, as I think was mentioned, I mean, there is a push from the top, which is very important. Because if you look today, I mean, we have about 100 billions of trade, both in goods and services. But at the same time, where I think somehow the partnership, which is relatively weak, is in the investment.
Right.
Because, you know, I mean, if you look at all the Ministry of Commerce figures, we have only about 6% investment coming from the US. Some investment may come through the Mauritius route, but, you know, there's a plenty of scope. I mean, the talk of, you know, starting investment, you know, negotiations, and in fact, you know, a couple of things which he announced, particularly the renewable energy and, you know, but that's relatively small. I mean, you know, a couple of $1 billion is not really going to make huge, but that could push a little bit to begin, particularly in the energy sector.
Right.
But I think the, you know, the way leadership from the both countries now is looking this relationship in a much more positive manner. And as the Prime Minister announced that, you know, most of the major projects, I mean, the Prime Minister's office is going to kind of monitor big infrastructure and other projects. So there is a kind of push from the top. Now it's up to the business from both the countries to really take advantage of this.
Yes, Pramit Pal Chaudhary, ultimately it's the companies that have to do the business, and while a lot of business was spoken between the two big leaders of the two big democracies, as far as the companies are concerned, do you see that engagement getting, happening faster in American companies investing in India, India perhaps selling more products to the United States?
Well, I think as has been mentioned, Modi has basically laid out that I will change the business environment of India, not just for foreign companies, but for Indian companies as well. And this ease of business policy that he's trying to enact, part of which is incorporated in the Make in India the attempt to make sure that infrastructure comes up faster and better than it has before, and of course reversing the very damaging taxation policies introduced by the second UPA government. All of this he's laid out and said, I'm going to do this, and then there are other elements which are specific to America, like FDI insurance and so on. But he still has to implement. He's only been in power for 8 months, and he's struggled with the upper house of parliament to get legislation through. So we'll have to see what happens. But the point is, it's not just American investors. Indian investors are not investing in India right now. That's why our economy is going to grow at only 5 or 6% this coming year, if not less. But he's laid it out, and it's very clear that American companies are excited. You've seen the US IBC chief even in September and said, if Mr. Modi carries out what he plans, we're prepared to put in $100 billion. This is the US private sector coming in. We're prepared to put in $100 billion into this country. And definitely foreign institutional investment, the vast bulk of which comes out of the United States, FII inflows in India over the past 6 or 7 months have been staggeringly high. So we're definitely seeing a lot of interest, but companies are not going to invest on the basis of promises. They're going to wait for Modi to actually implement the reforms that he's talked about.
All right, Ambassador Prakash, quickly to get you in on the subject of trade first, and then we'll move to the other topic. But as far as trade is concerned, it's a pretty stiff target, the five-fold increase in trade. And I mean, what our guest was suggesting earlier when we were talking about this was, at least you reach for the stars and you'll you'll at least hit the moon. So in that sense, is the figure realistic? And do you really see a change happening? While a lot has been said, do you see things changing on the ground that fast?
Is a very nice and round figure, but I think it is certainly very ambitious. If it can double the trade figure, from 67 it has gone to 100, but if it can become 200, I think we have reasons to be satisfied, and that is in the time frame that we can foresee. As the co-panelists have already mentioned, I think the Prime Minister did say today that he tracks all these numbers. The numbers are important for him. I think the numbers run in his blood, as we know, and he assures the American businessmen, as also the Indian businessmen, that he tracks these figures. So I think tracking is also a matter of the time frame. So in the coming, let's say, we can't really expect anything before the budget, but in the coming, before the next budget, if these numbers start moving up, then figures are not as important as really doubling it to begin with, and then we can look at the larger picture. And that seems to me to be doable if, as all your panelists, my co-panelists have agreed, if we start implementing some of these things, which I think the PM is committed to on our side.
All right, so implementation is the key as far as increasing trade ties are concerned. Another very interesting point, Obama came over here, I mean, and that is what the global pundits had been saying, that he wants to strike a climate deal. The fact that he, in this business meeting itself, business summit itself, he said that he would like to invest $2 billion in renewable energy in India. It means that, I mean, we might not have had a deal on climate change per se, but that both India and the United States are committed to renewable energy.
Well, on climate change, there are two aspects. One is the American commercial interest in clean energy, solar and other renewable energies, which is what Obama primarily talked about. On that, I think there will be definite progress because there is American business interest involved in it. But on the global climate change effort, it's more a statement of intent, whatever has been said, because the Paris meeting is still 10 months away. I don't see anything happening overnight. Also, because there is enough time to negotiate, and each country wants to get the best deal for itself. So while on the commercial aspect of renewable energy efforts, one could see progress. I would imagine that on the broader framework of global warming and all that, I don't see anything actually concretizing shortly before the Paris meeting. You know, I don't expect that what the Americans worked out with China will happen here.
All right, that is a little bit about climate change, because I want to throw it all to you. Pramit Pal, I'll start with you. The big takeaways, and then we can discuss that over the next 15 minutes or so. One big takeaway for you from the American president's visit over here.
I think there were three basic silos that we were looking at. One was defense. The other was geopolitics, and the third was counterterrorism. I think the defense silo is overflowing. The renewal of the 10-year agreement, the fact that we've actually brought to life the Defense Trade and Technology Initiative, which is a revolutionary concept because it's not about buying and selling arms, which is traditionally what we've been doing with the Americans. It's about actual Indian companies working with American companies to build the next generation of weapon systems. And this is crucial because what we have always wanted to do is have our own indigenous weapons capacity, and the Americans are saying, okay, we're going to allow you to start working with our companies to develop this. You will therefore share not just the technology, but the capacities to develop and design weapons. And that's going to be revolutionary, especially if it actually brings the Indian private sector in. It's going to be a huge thing. On the energy side, I'm not as pessimistic about climate change as KP is. I think Modi is very, very interested, personally very interested in climate change. And I know the Prime Minister's office has already initiated a number of private studies about what India can provide at Paris. For example, what percentage of our electricity can we say by, let's say, 2030 can come from renewables? And I think a pretty strong figure of maybe 20% or something is something we're looking at. A lot of it depends on how much external support we can get. Finally, and on counterterrorism, you look at it, in the September statement, we Americans agreed to incorporate Dawood Ibrahim's, the D Company, and the Haqqani network into the list of terrorist organizations that we would both work against. In this statement, we've added an interesting phrase. We have said we will work to the disruption, and that in counterterrorism is a very specific technical term that refers to the use of to degrade a terrorist organization to the point that it is unable to operate anymore, and to look for means of actionable elements between the two sides. You know, actionable elements is an interesting phrase because it actually means that we're looking at means bilaterally that we can work together to actually take on specific terrorist groups. And as I've mentioned, these now incorporate new organizations like the Haqqani Network and D Company. So I look at these three things, I'm impressed. And finally, the joint statement on the strategic vision of the Indian Ocean and Asia Pacific. I find this a very startling document because it says very clearly that India and the United States do not support and will oppose China's territorial claims on the South China Sea. It specifically says South China Sea, which we've never said before. It doesn't say China, I agree, but there's no other country that's making a claim on the South China Sea. So I find this interesting because we're essentially coming out of the closet and saying China's territorial ambitions are something India wants to work with the United States to stop.
All right, it's an interesting point that you leave us with there, and Professor Sachdeva, I'll get you in on that. As far as China is concerned, I mean, the media over there has called it a very superficial kind of a visit, but at the end of the day, the joint strategic vision statement certainly says, as far as the United States is concerned, what it seems to suggest is India is the new counter to China for the United States.
Well, in fact, I totally agree with Pramit. I mean, particularly if you look at this vision document on Indian Ocean as well as, Asia-Pacific region, it says many things, in fact. One is that, of course, it's a kind of increasing regional economic integration between Southeast Asia, South Asia, Central Asia. And then to say that, for particularly to increase or provide these opportunities of economic integration, you do need regional security architecture you do need regional, some kind of stability, and within that, then the issue of South China Sea comes. So it means basically we are kind of hinting through this that there is some kind of convergence of interest between India and the United States. So the major challenge, in fact, in that sense for the policymakers in India would be, because for us, of course, United States is very important. This is quite clearly laid down in this vision document, but at the same time, we do have very very important relationship with China, particularly economic, as well as now we do have many political differences on many other issues. So challenge for us would be really how to manage this relationship, working simultaneously both with the United States as well as with China. So in that sense, but in the broader sense, I would say the transformation of Indian Indian foreign policy, which started to some extent with the UPA 1, with the strategic partnership with the United States, now with the new government under leadership of Prime Minister Modi, somehow we are kind of culminating the transformation of that changes in the Indian foreign policy, which is kind of coming within this vision document.
All right. In fact, interesting point you raised there, Ambassador Prakash. I'd like your take on this, because it's a continuing process. Diplomacy is, so it's not just a one-off 3-day visit. This has been in the making for some time now, and that's what the leaders also have to say today. I mean, the ideas were decided in September, and the script came out yesterday.
That's right. Yes. Yes. Are you asking me?
Yes.
Are you asking me a question?
Yes, Ambassador Prakash, I'm asking you. As far as the United States is concerned, just the fact that it's really come down to geopolitics. Yes. So the question on that, about India's position.
I think that this visit has shown what we knew, that there are so many common interests, a wide variety of common interests, but not identical interests. Areas in which we are interested, starting from water to weather to vaccines, and also the political and the strategic aspects. So there are so many issues to discuss, and of course we do not necessarily agree or have a commonality of interest on all of these, but we have also learned how to find common ground. I think the 3 dramatic examples of this first happened earlier with regard to the trade facilitation and WTO, the food subsidy issue, for which the common ground was found. And this time, I think a common ground again was found despite the differences on the nuclear issue and also on the climate change issue, where both sides recognize. I think the climate change issue, in my view, is really the US appreciating India's unique position and then saying that we are committed to really using other resources, clean source of energy, and being prepared to fund it and also transfer technology. So I think it's a very mature way of finding an area where we thought we had differences. I agree with the other 2 panelists who find that this particular document, the Strategic Vision for Asia Pacific, this is a very, very significant development. Not only because of the mention of China, for me, the fact that India is signaling that it wants to be a partner, a player in the larger Asia Pacific region. And we talk of, actually this document talks of from Africa to East Asia. That's a very large sweep. So we are clearly not confined to South Asia. The US does not regard us as merely being confined to South Asia. It's a much larger arc in which we are going to work with US, and there are many other interesting aspects in the document. There is mention about the human rights, there is mention about India wanting to join APEC and US supporting this process. So I think we need to look at this far more closely than what has been so far done by the media.
Absolutely, half an hour is certainly not enough to cover this entire visit. But KP, because I've run out of time, I just have about 2-3 minutes. Final questions now. In terms of takeaways, we've addressed most of them, but what will be the most significant thing for you, and how do you see this relationship going ahead from now?
See, in terms of takeaways, I would like to focus on 2 unconventional aspects. One is the impact of Obama's public persona. I think we've had a series of leaders coming here, Putin, the Japanese, the Chinese, everybody, you know. I mean, I think Obama's persona has stood out, you know. Most of the leaders that we have had coming in have been very stodgy, making very heavy speeches and all that. You know, the touch of humor that was everywhere in Obama's speeches. Even last night at the banquet, how he talked about the sleeping patterns of the Prime Minister and himself, about them dancing in Bombay. You know, the light touch that he provided to a state occasion throughout in his public appearances, I think will rub off on our younger leadership. You know, I'm not talking of the senior leaders, you know, but we are going through a generational change in our politics. The younger members of parliament and all that who have been following what's been going on in the last 2 days, I definitely think that it will rub off on them, and that is something we need, you know. I mean, in our politics there is very little humor. So I think that is one thing. Second thing I think is the whole relationship has somewhat been decentralized, you know. I mean, we focused a lot on the nuclear deal, the defense relationship and all. There have been little things that have happened which are much more important, like Trade Development Agency of the United States has signed an agreement on smart cities. There's been very little focus on that in our newspapers and the rest of the media. Similarly, very few people know that in another 3 days, Shivraj Singh Chauhan, the Chief Minister of Madhya Pradesh, is going to New York and Washington. You know, so the whole relationship is being decentralized. Everything is moving from Delhi as it used to be to the states. You see. And I think that is very important, because the Americans have been demanding this, you know, that the next generation of reforms should begin in the states. And that is really happening during the visit, and I think that will have a very long-term implication on the relationship, positively.
All right, using Prime Minister Modi's words himself, cooperative federalism is what he's been encouraging, and we'll have to wrap it up on that. I know there's so much that we need to talk about as far as this visit is concerned, and I'd like to invite all of you once again very soon to discuss the nuances of this Indo-American relationship in a completely new context, now that we've had this visit of the first American president to come in on Republic Day and be the chief guest, and of course a lot more than just being the chief guest on Republic Day. But thank you very much, KP Nair, Professor Sachdeva, Pramit Pal Chaudhary and Ambassador Prakash for coming in, and that was our presentation on Barack Obama, the US President's India visit. What do you think? Let us know. Well, that's it on Big Picture.